Adam Schiff, Elise, Stefanik. We're just going to do one of these comparison things, or two quick things. One's a comparison. Because passion and emotion, I think, are important parts when being an E-level representative. However, when Adam Schiff speaks, you tend to think he really means it. He's not trying to score grandstanding moments that can then be played on Fox News, whereas when Elise Stefanik speaks, in my mind, it's all, well, judge for yourself. And also, if you get a moment, please press the thanks button. I've been embarrassed to say this, but love to buy my team a coffee, $1.99. Thank you.
That's, you asked a question, I think, that I've been haunted by ever since. Is this America? And I'm very interested to know your thoughts on the answer to that question. Is this America what you saw?
Well, thank you for your question. You know, I said this, I've done a few interviews before about what my experiences that day, and I said that it was a war that we fought, and a war is composed of a bunch of different battles. And everybody, even sitting at this table, fought a different battle that day, but it was all for the same war. And as Black officers, I believe we fought a different battle also. And the fact that we had our race attacked, and just because of the way we look, you know. To answer your question, frankly, I guess it is America. It shouldn't be, but I guess that's the way that things are. I don't condone it, I don't like it, but I mean, if you look at our history, of American history, countries existed because they won a war, or colonies and state lines and boundaries exist because of violence and wars. So I guess it sounds silly, but I guess it is American, and but it's not the side of America that I like. It's not the side of that any of us here represent. We represent the good side of America, the people that actually believe in decency and human decency, and we appeal to just the good in people. That's what we want to see, whether we disagree with how they vote on a bill about infrastructure. Everybody wants the right thing, people to do okay. So that's why I'm glad to see this committee composed of Republican members also. So that's encouraging. It's encouraging. So that's the side of America that I say, yes, this is America. This is the side that I like and the side that I acknowledge. So,
Officer, thank you. I believe in this country, and I believe in it because of people like you who understand what the flag means and what our Constitution means and risk their lives to defend it. I'd like to think, as Amanda Gorman so eloquently said, that we're not broken, we're just unfinished. Because if we're no longer committed to a peaceful transfer of power after our elections, if our side doesn't win, then God help us. If we deem elections illegitimate merely because they didn't go our way, rather than trying to do better the next time, then God help us. And if we're so driven by bigotry and hate that we attack our fellow citizens as traitors, if they're born in another country or they don't look like us, and God help us. But I have faith because of folks like you. And Adam, I didn't expect this would be quite so emotional either, but it must be an Adam thing today. But I'm so grateful to all of you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Stefanik, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Dr. Gay, a Harvard student calling for the mass murder of African Americans is not protected free speech at Harvard, correct?
Our commitment to free speech...
It's a yes or no question. Is that corrected? Is that okay for students to call for the mass murder of African Americans at Harvard? Is that protected free speech?
Our commitment to free speech
It's a yes or no
extends-
question. Let me ask you this. You are president of Harvard, so I assume you're familiar with the term intifada, correct?
I've heard that term, yes.
And you understand that the use of the term intifada in the context of the Israeli-Arab conflict is indeed a call for violent armed resistance against the state of Israel, including violence against civilians and the genocide of Jews. Are you aware of that?
That type of hateful speech is personally abhorrent to me.
And there have been multiple marches at Harvard with students chanting, quote, "There is only one solution, intifada revolution," and, quote, "globalize the intifada." Is that correct?
I've heard that thoughtless, reckless, and hateful language on our campus, yes.
So based upon your testimony, you understand that this call for intifada is to commit genocide against the Jewish people in Israel and globally, correct?
I will say again, that type of hateful speech is personally abhorrent to me.
Do you believe that type of hateful speech is contrary to Harvard's code of conduct, or is it allowed at Harvard?
It is at odds with the values of Harvard.
Can you
But
not
our
say here that it
values
is against the
also-
code of conduct at Harvard?
We embrace a commitment to free expression, even of views that are objectionable, offensive, hateful. It's when that speech crosses into conduct that violates our policies against bullying, harassment,
Does that speech
and
not
intimidation.
cross that barrier? Does that speech not call for the genocide of Jews and the elimination of Israel?
When
You
that speech-
testify that you understand that is the definition of intifada. Is that speech according to the code of conduct or not?
We embrace a commitment to free expression and give a wide berth to free expression, even of views that are objectionable.
You and I
outrageous,
both know
and
that's not the
offensive.
case. You are aware that Harvard ranked dead last when it came to free speech. Are you not aware of that report?
As I observed earlier, I reject that characterization.
It's the
of our
data shows
campus.
it's true. And isn't it true that Harvard previously rescinded multiple offers of admissions for applicants and accepted freshmen for sharing offensive memes, racist statements, sometimes as young as 16 years old? Did Harvard not rescind those offers of admission?
That long predates my time as president.
But you
so I can't
understand
speak.
that Harvard made that decision to rescind those offers of admission.
I have no reason to contradict the facts as you present them. here.
Correct, because it's a fact. You're also aware that a Winthrop House faculty dean was let go over who he chose to legally represent, correct? That was while you were dean.
That is an incorrect characterization of what transpired.
What's the characterization?
I'm not going to get into details about a personnel matter.
Well, let me ask you this. Will admissions offers be rescinded or any disciplinary action be taken against students or applicants who say, "From the river to the sea" or "Intifada," advocating for the murder of Jews?
As I've said, that type of hateful, reckless, offensive speech is personally abhorrent to me.
Today that
When
no
s-
action will be taken. What action will be taken?
When speech crosses into conduct that violates our policies, including policies against bullying, harassment, or intimidation, we take action, and we have robust disciplinary processes that allow us to hold individuals accountable.
What action has been taken against students who are harassing and calling for the genocide of Jews on Harvard's campus?
I can assure you, we have robust
What
disciplinary
actions have been
processes
taken? I'm not
with
asking.
actions underway.
I'm asking what actions have been taken against
Given-
those students.
Given students' rights to privacy and our obligations under FERPA, I will not say more about any specific cases other than to reiterate that processes are ongoing.
Do you know what the number one hate crime in America is?
I know that over the last couple of months, there has been an alarming rise of anti-Semitism, which I understand is the critical topic that we are here to discuss.
That's correct. It is anti-Jewish hate crimes. And Harvard ranks the lowest when it comes to protecting Jewish students. This is why I've called for your resignation, and your testimony today, not being able to answer with moral clarity, speaks volumes. I
Notice
yield
having the
back.
amendment is not agreed to. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from California seeks recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved. Mr. McClintock.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. McClintock, offered by
Without
Mr.
objection,
Schiff.
the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is simple. It would exempt individuals fleeing communist and totalitarian regimes from Section 104. We should exempt people fleeing communist and totalitarian dictatorships from this legislation and allow them to apply for asylum as our laws were intended. The underlying bill would bar individuals who cross the border between ports of entry from seeking asylum. This means individuals would be forced to wait in Mexico to cross the border and be processed. That would make people fleeing communist and totalitarian regimes sitting ducks for the cartels for exploitation, abuse, kidnapping, or murder. We have seen what happens when people are forced to wait in Mexico for too long. Under the Remain in Mexico program, there were over 1,500 publicly reported cases of murder, rape, torture, kidnapping, and other violent assaults against migrants returned under the Remain in Mexico program. In fact, just last month, we saw what happens when vulnerable migrants are put at risk, when migrants in an immigration center in Ciudad Juarez were left to be burned alive. This is not the fate we want for anyone, and we don't want people fleeing totalitarian dictatorships like people fleeing Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua or Russia or China or Vietnam or elsewhere to have to face those kind of dangers. There was a time when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle claimed to oppose communism and totalitarian dictatorships and welcomed people fleeing those horrible regimes. The underlying bill suggests otherwise. I urge my colleagues to join in this amendment so that those fleeing asylum are not put at those fleeing persecution by these communist regimes are not put at additional risk by having to wait for long periods of time in dangerous places before they can lawfully apply for asylum.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Will you yield for the clarifying question?
You can seek your own recognition. I'm going to yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman seek recognition?
I guess so.
The point of order is withdrawn, and Mr. Gaetz is recognized.
Thank you. I yield to the sponsor. If the sponsor would be willing to engage in a colloquy with me, would you consider the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to be a totalitarian dictatorship?
Mr. Gaetz, I gave the same answer that Representative Lofgren gave before. These are not new terms of art. These are the terms used in current law. And so we are merely applying current law to protect people, and in particular, in this case, those that are fleeing communist dictatorships. If the gentleman, his objection is that this definition is overbroad.
No. Mr. Schiff,
You yielded to me.
I'm asking you a clarifying question.
If you would yield, if you would respond to my question, which is, if this amendment is narrowed to communist dictatorships, will you support it?
Well, again, Mr. Schiff, I'm just trying to understand what your
I guess your
amendment
answer is
says.
no, then, Mr. Gaetz.
Well, that you perhaps assume too much, my
Then
friend.
your answer is
because
yes.
I'm asking what you mean by totalitarian dictatorship and just whether the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would qualify. It's just a yes or no question.
Well, I certainly think.
Forgive me for not knowing the list that Ms.
Would you like an answer, Mr. Gaetz?
I'm
I certainly
attempting a
consider
second time.
Saudi Arabia to be a dictatorship. Yes, I do.
A totalitarian one?
Mr. Gaetz, my question is, if your problem with this amendment is you think it's
Mr.
overbroad.
Schiff, I'm not stating a problem with the amendment. I am merely asking you what it means.
My question then, Mr. Gaetz, is will
What
you
is the
support
difference
it?
between a dictatorship and a totalitarian dictatorship?
My question.
Since Saudi Arabia is a dictatorship.
There is a difference between totalitarianism and dictatorship.
Well, sure, I'm asking you to explain the differences of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
That's really the question, Mr. Gaetz.
Why can't you just answer whether or not your amendment would apply to them?
Mr. Gaetz, this is just a rhetorical exercise.
It's a serious effort to understand whether or not your amendment applies to the kingdom.
If your question is sincere, which I know assumes too much, but if it is, then will you support the amendment confined to communist dictatorships? Yes or no, Mr. Gaetz?
I'm probably not going to support the amendment either way. That
Well,
doesn't
there
mean
you go.
I don't
There you
want to know
go.
what
Well,
it
then
means.
what about all the rhetoric you constantly espouse about standing up to communism? Here you're saying someone fleeing communism, if they're interdicted between ports, then they will not qualify.
Right,
Doesn't
because
matter what kind of
there is
regime.
a mechanism by which one seeks asylum for those very reasons, and it's not showing up and creating an entire
So this
loophole in
whole
the
thing
asylum
about Saudi
system.
Arabia is just a red herring, right?
I'm
Mr. Gaetz?
just curious to know whether or not you
Well,
consider them
I
qualifying under the
appreciate
bill.
your
and I
curiosity, but
have
I would
burned
appreciate
2.5 minutes. And it's just a simple question.
consistency.
You know, Mr.
I
Schiff,
would
people on the
appreciate
border
consistency
don't get to have a
more than
debate like this
curiosity.
like you and I do. It's
I would
not your time,
appreciate
Mr.
it
Schiff. I'm
if you
reclaiming
would
my
stand
time.
up to
Mr.
communism
Gaetz has the time. Mr.
the
Gaetz
way
has
you
the
say
time.
you do.
Mr. Gaetz has the time.
Look, on the border, someone doesn't get to have this joyful little colloquy with you. A Border Patrol agent has to look at someone and assess whether or not they're going to let them in or not. And I'm just, for clarity, even though I'm not going to support your amendment, I'm going to support the bill. In the unlikely event that your amendment were to be adopted, I simply want to know if someone encounters someone from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, whether or not the exception that your amendment affords would allow that or not.
As I said, I'm using the existing definition, Mr. Gaetz. My
So
question
does
to
that
you
definition
is,
include the
my
kingdom or
question
not?
to you is, will
This
you
is
will you
insane.
live
This
up
isn't-
to
you
your
just have to answer the
anti-communist rhetoric?
question,
Will
Mr.
you
Schiff.
live up to your anti-communist rhetoric, or is it just a lot of talk from you, Mr. Gaetz?
I don't think you have to blow a
I
hole
guess
through the
it's
asylum
just
system to
a lot
oppose
of talk.
communism.
I guess it's just a lot of talk with you. Nothing more than a lot of
It's all,
empty
I just want
talk.
to know if the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is included or excluded. How is this so difficult for you?
Well,
Do
just-
you have
just-
any compassion for the people who would have to make this assessment on the border? I just want to know.
Would you care for me to read the code section to you?
Gladly.
The existence of a single political party organized on a dictatorial basis with so close an identity between such party and its policies and the government policies of the country in which it exists, and the party and the government constitute an indistinguishable unit, and the forcible suppression of opposition to such party. That is how the code currently defines a totalitarian party
would you define Saudi
and a
Arabia that way or not?
totalitarian dictatorship.
Would you define them
if
that way or
you-
not, Adam?
So if you wanted to know, read the code. But the
But would you
question
apply
is
to
not,
them or not?
the
It's your
question is
amendment.
not whether you can read the code. The question is
You wrote the
whether you
amendment, and you
stand for
can't say
anything,
whether it
Mr.
applies
Gaetz.
to a specific
the question
country.
is, do you
Why does this
stand?
pain you so
do you
much?
stand for anything? Does anything you say mean anything
I
to you?
merely am seeking your own
Are you
ability
really
to define
so
your own
soft?
amendment.
Are you really so soft on communism now, Mr. Gaetz? I am shocked.
Soft on communism.
So
You're soft on
And
definitions
you would
within
accept,
your own
you would,
bill.
You would
Soft on the
prosecute.
basics of
you
the
would
English
prosecute
language. Soft
and
on the
deny
interpretation
asylum
statute
to someone
mechanisms
fleeing
by which a Border
communism
Patrol agent would have
merely
to apply
because
this.
they won't.
You know what? A
wait
Border
in
Patrol
Mexico
agent
to
isn't going to
be
have this.
Mercifully, the
marginalized.
gentleman is out of time. Mercifully, the gentleman is out of time. Okay. Woo.
Should we have unanimous consent to
No,
continue?
no, everybody's out of time. Everybody's out of time. Does anyone seek recognition?